President, I'm here tonight to talk about the foreign aid supplemental that is the pending business on this floor. But before I do that, I have to take a moment of personal privilege, if my colleagues will allow me in light of recent events, just to say a word about the Kansas City Chiefs, who last night in dramatic fashion won their third Super Bowl in the last 5 years. Now, as a lifelong Kansas City fan, it's an incredible privilege to get to congratulate the Chiefs again on this floor, just as I did last year. For those who missed the game, the Chiefs beat the 49ers in a terrific game. Final score of 25-22 in an overtime thriller. Only the second time, I think, in Super Bowl history that a Super Bowl has gone into overtime. Yet again, the Chiefs came back from a double-digit deficit. We're down 10 points at one point in the first half, coming back to win the game, again by a score of 25-22. This is the first time in 19 years now that a team has won back-to-back Super Bowls, and already we in the Kansas City area and Chiefs Kingdom are ready for a three-peat as we gear up for next season. I just want to call out a few folks who had particularly outstanding performances, and I have to start by highlighting my good friend Harrison Butker, the Kansas City Chiefs' stellar kicker, best kicker in the league. Harrison last night set a new Super Bowl record with a 57-yard field goal at the end of the first half. He scored more than half of the team's total points, being 4 for 4 in field goal attempts and, of course, 1 for 1 in his point-after attempts. Made a crucial field goal there at the end of the fourth quarter that tied the score and sent the game into overtime. This Super Bowl performance of his underscores a phenomenal season in which he was perfect in the postseason and missed only 2 field goals the entire regular season. And I'll just say, Mr. President, what happened last night was typical of Harrison's performance the entire season in terms of scoring points for this team. He has truly been an outstanding player this season, absolutely key to this team. And of course, what can you say about Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league, the best quarterback of all time, Andy Reid? Another phenomenal coaching game. His in-game adjustments, absolutely unbelievable. Terrific defensive play from Steve Spagnuolo's unit and everybody involved. Tight end Travis Kelce led the team in receiving last night, 9 receptions, 93 yards. Pacheco rushed 18 times for 59 yards, had 6 receptions for 33 yards. Mahomes, 34 of 46 pass attempts, 333 yards, rushed 9 times for 66 yards, and of course was named the Super Bowl's most valuable player. That makes him only the 3rd player to have won that honor 3 times, joining Tom Brady and the great Joe Montana. This is a terrific game, and I hope that we'll soon pass a resolution here on the floor to honor the Chiefs' terrific victory and to prepare for what I think will be a terrific season next season. Let me just say just 2 more things on this score, just personally. First, to Clark and Tavia and to their 3 kids. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for putting your faith at the center of all that you do. You've made your faith the center of your family. You've made your faith the center of your organization, and it shows the excellence that you have brought and continued with this program in Kansas City, with the organization that your family has built, that you've carried on, the legacy that you have passed along is truly incredible. So thank you, Clark and Tavia. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for what you've done for this organization. And on a personal note, to Harrison Butker and to Isabel, congratulations. Thank you for your bold witness for your faith. Thank you for the way that you lead your lives. Thank you for being a terrific ambassador, Harrison, and terrific ambassadors as a couple for the Kansas City Chiefs, for Kansas City, for the region, but most of all, for your faith, for the faith that we have in common. It's an honor to get to call you a friend. It's an honor to get to see you play. And this was such a terrific game last night. So fantastic game. Congratulations to all the Chiefs. Senator Marshall and I and others have offered a resolution honoring the team, which I hope will pass the Senate with unanimous consent. And we look forward to sharing that with all of the team members, Andy Reid, Clark, and Tavia, as well as the entire state of Missouri. And since my good friend Senator Marshall's on the floor, I'll just say that we in Kansas City, Missouri, the Chiefs and Missouri football team, we're so proud to have the Chiefs in Missouri. But hey, we welcome fans from Kansas and all around the country. So it's a great day for Missouri, but also for Chiefs fans everywhere. And you're sure welcome to cheer for them in the great state of Kansas as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for indulging me, Mr. President, in making those remarks and honoring this terrific football team. And I'll just say, as a guy who grew up as a young guy watching the Chiefs play, I still remember exactly where I was. Maybe Senator Marshall can relate to this. Exactly where I was when Joe Montana took the Chiefs to the AFC Championship game. Montana played for the Chiefs, of course, for 3 years toward the end of his career. And I still remember right where I was watching Montana in that first season at the AFC Championship game. It's by the farthest the Chiefs had ever gotten in my lifetime. We lost that game, unfortunately, but I was sitting in the Maid-Rite in Lexington, Missouri, where I grew up, watching them on a little TV that was kind of up in the corner there. And I thought to myself, man, it doesn't get better than this. But as we found out, it does get better than that. It gets better than just going to the AFC Championship game. It gets better when you win the AFC Championship game and you win the Super Bowl year after year after year. Congratulations to the Chiefs and the dynasty that they now have created in the National Football League, and I think they're just getting started. On a more serious note, Mr. President, and turning now to the topic of conversation that is before us on the floor tonight, we are considering the National Security Supplemental. And it is absolutely true that America faces no shortage of threats to our national security. Our own borders, to begin with, are, as we sit here and speak tonight, wide open. The number of border crossings continues at all-time highs. There were, in fiscal year 2023, 860,000 illegal gotaways, 302,000 encounters with illegal aliens in December of this last year alone. That's an all-time high for a single month. The number of Chinese migrants at the southwest border jumped more than tenfold, from 2,176 in fiscal year 2022 to 24,314 in fiscal year 2023. CBS News reports today that migrants in Mexico have made 64 million requests, 64 million requests to enter the United States using the CBP One app. That's an app that the federal government developed with your tax dollars for the phone that illegal immigrants can now use to get concierge service to cross the border. 64 million illegal immigrants have asked to set up appointments to enter the United States using this app. I laugh, but it's not funny. It's not funny at all. It's deadly serious. The threat across our southern border is deadly serious. The threats that we face on all sides across the world are deadly serious. In China, and imperial China is now twice as powerful relative to the United States as the Soviet Union was at its peak. And China explicitly seeks to dominate the world's largest economic area and to displace this country as a global power. They would have monumental, unprecedented implications. That would have monumental, unprecedented implications for America's interests. And we cannot allow that to happen. But right now, we are considering a so-called security supplemental that puts those pressing concerns last, not first. That does not do anything for our border at all. In fact, we were first served up a so-called border bill that would have made the problem worse, not better. A border bill that I think of as the Full Employment Act for illegal aliens. The border bill, so-called, that was before this chamber a week ago. That border bill, its central feature from my point of view, was to give illegal aliens already in the country expedited work permits. Expedited work permits now, such that millions of illegals, almost none of whom will ultimately qualify to remain here permanently in the country, including for asylum claims. Over 80% of asylum claims fail, we know statistically, and yet that bill would have given those illegal aliens here expedited work permits to go enter our labor force right now. we are looking at the flatlining of wages in this country for working people. Blue-collar workers, A, are having trouble finding a job, B, haven't seen a real rise in their wages in years. Over the last 30 years, blue-collar wages have declined, and yet the solution of this body would be to create even more cheap labor in this country. We know why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Wall Street loved that bill. It's a cheap labor bill. They love cheap labor. Their first preference would be overseas cheap labor, but if they can't get that, then why not subject Americans and those who are here legally to even more illegal cheap labor? It makes absolutely no sense at all, Mr. President, none at all, which is why I voted against it. And yet that's what we were offered as a solution to the border. As to a solution to China, this body has drug its feet and neglected its responsibilities toward China for years. One is tempted to say decades, and the current security supplemental does nothing meaningful in that regard. In fact, the focus is entirely, almost, certainly heavily, on Ukraine. More money for Ukraine. We've spent $115 billion almost in Ukraine so far. This bill would commit tens of billions more, and to what end? Let me just offer a contrast, Mr. President. Not long ago, I was on this floor discussing the need, discussing the cries for justice from Americans in my state, in Arizona, Idaho, New Mexico, Texas, Wyoming, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alaska, Americans who have been exposed to nuclear radiation or radioactive waste by their own government going back decades. In my state, the city of St. Louis was used as a uranium processing facility at the very beginning of the Oppenheimer project, the Manhattan Project. We've all learned about this in greater detail thanks to that movie. But have we yet learned about the brave men and women in this country who gave their health and, in many instances, yes, their lives to see that project come to fruition? Well, we haven't when it comes to the brave men and women of Missouri, I can tell you that. St. Louis was a secret uranium processing site for years. And when the federal government shut down its uranium processing work in St. Louis, what did it do? Did it clean up the uranium? Did it clean up the nuclear waste? No, it didn't. Here's what it did. It put the waste into canisters, metal canisters, unsecured, set them out in open parking lots and other facilities exposed to the elements, exposed to the wind and the rain and the weather for years on end, and then watched as those metal drums leaked nuclear waste right out of the drum, right down into the soil, and right into the water, right into a creek. Coldwater Creek is its name, that runs through the greater St. Louis area, from the center of the city out into the suburbs. And just as this was happening in the 1950s into the 1960s, what was happening to those suburbs? Well, people were moving out of city centers. They were moving to the suburbs. They were building homes. And where were they building their homes? Along this beautiful, picturesque creek that just so happens, Mr. President, to have been contaminated from the 50s forward with nuclear waste. Where did the waste come from? From the federal government. But that wasn't the only place in St. Louis that was contaminated. No, the federal government also then decided that, you know what, maybe a way to get rid of this would be we'll just dump all of the waste in a public landfill. So that's what they did. Mr. President, they took the waste, some of it, to a public landfill without any controls, without any appropriate cleanup, and by the way, without informing the public, and they dumped it into the landfill along with everything else that was there, taking no precautions, exercising no appropriate cleanup. They dumped it at another location called Laddie Avenue, and then there was yet another location called Weldon Spring, such that there are now multiple locations, all of these years later, in the city of St. Louis, and we're talking now about just one metropolitan area in this country. Multiple locations where nuclear waste has been dumped into the soil, dumped into the water, exposing people into the air, and for 50+ years it has been going on. It continues as I stand tonight on this floor. Because how much of it has been cleaned up, Mr. President? None of it. Has the creek been cleaned up? No. Has the landfill been cleaned up? No. Has the second landfill at Weldon Spring, has it been cleaned up? No. Has Laddie Avenue been appropriately cleaned up? No. No, it has not. But what has happened is generations of residents of my state in St. Louis and then in St. Charles have played in that creek. They have gone to those schools. They have been exposed repeatedly to this nuclear radiation and waste, and they have developed cancers of many and various kinds, such that we lead the nation now in St. Louis County in breast cancer, in various childhood cancers. It's not natural, Mr. President. There's nothing normal about it. It's because of what the federal government has done and done for decades. Why do I mention it? Well, because the program that this government set up some years ago to compensate those Americans who have been exposed by their government to nuclear radiation is about to expire. And just a few months ago, I secured the approval of this body to renew it. We passed here on the floor of this body with a strong bipartisan vote, a renewal measure to make good on our promise to those Americans who've been exposed to nuclear radiation by their government, who've grown ill because of nuclear radiation by their government, who have died because of nuclear radiation by their government, to make good on our promise to help them. We passed it. We also included in that legislation relief for the people of St. Louis and St. Charles and others in Missouri, relief for the people of New Mexico and Arizona and Utah and others who were downwind of these tests that we saw so vividly portrayed in the Oppenheimer movie and elsewhere. And then what happened, Mr. President? Well, I'll tell you what happened. The National Defense Authorization Act, the defense bill, went to conference. And there, despite the strong bipartisan vote on this floor, there it was removed in a backroom deal. Senator McConnell and others led the charge to remove this provision. And what was the rationale? What were we told? Why was it that nuclear radiation victims from Missouri to Kentucky to Tennessee to Alaska cannot be compensated according to so-called leadership? What was the rationale, Mr. President? No, I remember it vividly. I've heard it. It rings in my ears every day. The rationale is we don't have the money. The rationale is it's too expensive to do right by the American people who have suffered and died because of their government's nuclear radiation program. The rationale was we can't possibly afford it. That was the rationale. And now, lo and behold, I turn, Mr. President, to this bill before us, and I find we seem to have unlimited sums of money when it comes to foreign wars. Good Lord, when it comes to funding the machinery of war, we have money, we have money, we have money that we couldn't possibly dream of. We can run the presses indefinitely if it's going to go overseas. If we're going to be paying foreign governments, why, we've got enough money, apparently, to send $8 billion direct to the treasury of Ukraine. My goodness, we have enough money to make hundreds of millions of dollars of our taxpayer funds available to the private sector in Ukraine. We are now literally funding their businesses, their banks, Lord knows what. We've got money without end. We've got enough money to pay for bureaucrats' salaries. We've got enough money to pay for Ukrainian government officials' pensions. We've got enough money for so-called humanitarian aid that gets funneled away from, siphoned off into any manner of corrupt uses. We won't know because we don't have a special inspector general to oversee this money, but that's a different story. Oh no, we've got plenty of money. And I have listened carefully to colleague after colleague of mine come to this floor and stand where I am now and say, it's so important that we spend this money. on these overseas wars, we must spend the money. If we don't spend this money now, why, it may cost us more money in the future. No, it's imperative. It's imperative that we spend this money. Meanwhile, these same people turn to the citizens of Missouri and say, you're not worth a dime. They say, you can't have a penny. They turn to the residents of Kentucky and Tennessee and Alaska and New Mexico and Arizona and Utah and Texas, and they say, we don't care that you were poisoned. We don't have a dime for you. We have unlimited money for Ukraine. We're going to rebuild the borders of Ukraine. That's in this bill, but we don't have anything for you. We are probably, for all I know, paying for radiation exposure compensation for Ukrainians in this bill. We very well could be, Mr. President. We'll never know because there'll never be an accounting. But the contrast strikes me as not only stark, it strikes me as absurd. It strikes me as absurd. If worse than that, it strikes me as grossly unjust. Listen, if you want to give money to overseas military operations, I think you're making a mistake when it comes to Ukraine. I think doing it without oversight is a serious mistake. I think doing it in a way that seriously harms our position in the Pacific, which is our most important foreign policy challenge, is a serious mistake. I think doing it before we secure our own border is a serious mistake. But given all of that, if you want to give money to foreign wars in Ukraine, that's one thing. But to turn around and say, we have plenty of money for that endeavor, we have unlimited sums of money for that endeavor, but we have nothing for the people in the United States of America, we have nothing for those who are sick and dying of cancer because of their government's action. To say that, Mr. President, is not only a juxtaposition that strikes the mind, to say that is manifestly unjust. To say that is wrong. To say that cannot be sustained, Mr. President. To say that is a scar on the conscience of this body. It cannot be that we have unlimited sums of cash for foreign wars and we have nothing for the needs of our own people who our own government has hurt and poisoned. That cannot be true in this country. It cannot be. Which is why, Mr. President, I will soon demand again that this body vote to make good on this government's commitment to help those whom its government has poisoned. But I hope and expect that when that time soon comes, we will not hear talk about how expensive it is to clean up after the federal government, how expensive it is for all of these Americans, hundreds of thousands of them who've been poisoned by the government, how expensive it is for them after we have been treated to speech after speech, hour upon hour, day upon day, of just how important it is to spend this money in Ukraine. If it's good enough for the Ukrainians, surely it's good enough for the American people. Surely, Mr. President, it is good enough for the American people. And what of those in East Palestine? Here we are, a year now, since the train derailment, the explosions, the chemical spill in that state. And it's not just, of course, the residents right there, as devastating as it was for East Palestine, but those chemical agents spilled into the waterways, eventually meeting up with the Mississippi, carrying those toxic agents all the way down, including into my state of Missouri, affecting everybody who lives along the river and in the greater watershed area. And I just note again, Mr. President, what is it that this body has seen fit to do for the residents of East Palestine? Has that crisis been addressed? Has that spill been cleaned up? Has our river been cleaned? No. Have we voted on a railway safety bill? No. No. We haven't lifted a finger, this body hasn't, to do anything to help the residents of East Palestine or anybody else downstream from that crisis. Certainly the people of Missouri haven't gotten an ounce of relief. Nothing. Nothing. But we have unlimited time, unlimited resources, and unlimited rhetoric for our foreign wars. There is a moral incongruity here that cannot be sustained. It cannot be that the American people will constantly be asked to be fodder for our foreign wars and adventures while their needs are overlooked, overshadowed, and put to one side. It is not sustainable, Madam President. It is not right, Madam President. Whether we're talking about St. Louis and St. Charles, Missouri, or East Palestine, or any other state in this nation, it is not right that this body's priority is time and time and time again overseas wars, the machinery of war, foreign adventurism, and of course, let's not forget the priorities of Wall Street. Let's not forget that. Right. Who is it that always gets paid? In the National Defense Bill, we were told over and over there's just no money available for Americans poisoned by their government. But I noticed that we had $1 trillion in funds available for defense contractors. Wall Street always gets paid. The defense contractors always get paid. And this body always hops to do their bidding. I've seen it over and over in my short time in the Senate. It doesn't take long if you're paying attention to see who really calls the shots around here. The big corporations, the defense contractors, the Wall Street banks, they call the shots. Both parties, let's be honest. That's why we call it the uniparty. Because at the end of the day, there's one set of interests that play the tune and that call the shots, and they're the ones who get paid. Now, the American people have to take a back seat to that. If the working people of my state in Ohio have to get nothing, then that's just how it is. But Wall Street will certainly get paid. The defense contractors will certainly get paid. They'll certainly have their way. And so here we are again. I'm sure they love this bill. They love this bill, which makes me think, Mr. President, maybe one way to help clear the eyes and focus the mind on this body is maybe we ought to pass a law that says that no member of Congress can hold stock or trade stock in corporations that have contracts with the defense industry. Wouldn't it change things around here if no member of Congress could turn a profit on the machinery of war? My goodness, what a difference that would make. My goodness, how the debates in this chamber would change. My goodness, might it be, heaven forbid, that members might ask themselves, what should we do for the workers of this country as opposed to the defense contractors who are making hand over fist money in Ukraine? I keep hearing all this talk about how this bill is really all about renewing our industrial base. What that really means is it's about sending more money to defense contractors. They've already gotten paid once this year. Now they're going to get paid again. And I'm sure again and again and again. But mark my words, in just a few weeks' time, we'll be hearing about how we have no funds for anybody who's a victim of nuclear radiation, no funds to do anything for East Palestine, no funds to clean up any of the disasters this government has created. No, we have no money. We have no money. It's all gone to Ukraine. I think that the moral contrast is clear, Madam President. And all I can say is, I don't think it's lost on the American people who want to see a Congress that actually puts their interests first, to see a Congress that actually invests in them ahead of all others, to see a Congress that says if there's going to be a conflict between what we can afford to do overseas and at home, we're going to prioritize home. If it's between rebuilding another nation or rebuilding this one, we're going to rebuild this one. If it's between securing another nation's borders or our own, we're going to secure our own. But at the very least, if we're going to invest in all of these foreign wars, we're at least going to take care of our people in this country. At the very least, Mr. President, I think it is not lost on them, which is why here we are passing this bill probably in the dead of night, another exercise in this body's monumental detachment, disconnect, and frankly, contempt for the American people. I'll be voting no, Mr. President, but I'll be here to stand and speak for and say yes to the people of my state and other states around this nation who want to be prioritized, who want to be heard, who want to be put first by their government. I yield the floor.